Video ended up being quite a bit longer than I would have planned. I've decided to go ahead and add some links in the description so you can jump around a little bit and hit the parts that might be most interesting to you. If you need to go over them again, if you're trying to do this job, there's also going to be a list of the parts in the description with links probably to Amazon or wherever makes sense for you to get these individual parts. Thanks for watching. Please like and hit the bells for notifications. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Let's get into rebuilding this 72 Scout rear axle. Welcome back to Allison Customs Project Car TV. Today we are going to be working on the brakes, axle seals, and putting the cover back on the rear differential so the rear axle rear differential. It's a Dana 44 on a 1972 Scout 2. And so what you see here is I've got the wheel off, I've got the drum off of the brake. When I was cleaning all this stuff and painted the axle, I hadn't taken this side apart, so it's all painted black, which obviously you wouldn't want to do if you were going to be using them because your brake pads would be ruined. But we got a few things here. We got some springs here and here. We've got this spring and this spring we're going to be replacing. These 4 springs, we've got a 5th spring down here, and then we have a 6th spring over here that you can't see around the axle flange yet. And I'm going to take the axle out and leave the brake established so we can kind of get a better look at it, so that I can just kind of show you everything. But the other parts with that 6th spring, there's a divider bar down here, or I'm sorry, a adjuster down here, and then the adjuster arm, which sequences it for the automatic. So every time you put on the parking brake, it adjusts your brake shoes to make sure they're tensioned properly. And then the way that works is there is a arm on the back side of this shoe that I'll show you later that pivots every time you push on the brake pedal, or not the brake pedal, but the emergency brake pedal. It pulls the cable, and there's this divider bar up here that pushes on this shoe. So this shoe moves off of its pivot with the brake, and then this one is pushed out by the other one, so that's how they kind of lock the parking brake. So we'll look at that spring. We've got our wheel cylinder up here, and then we got 2 brake shoes. So we're going to be going through all of this, and we're going to be doing some. Normally you would not need to pull the axle to do brakes, but we're going to be doing a few things here. We're going to, like I said, we're going to pull the axle, and we're going to replace the seal here, and I've already done the other side, so that side is done. I replaced the pinion seal, which is just a matter of taking the nut off, knocking the seal out, putting the new seal in, and putting it back together. This is a little more complicated because not only are we going to do the inner and outer axle seal, we are also going to do the bearings, which on most cars you can just press those off. This, at least on the other side, they were so seized on there, which tells me they're original, that I ended up cutting them and then using a chisel to break them to get them to crack, and then I was able to pull them off. So I think I'm just going to start with that method. I'm just going to put a good score mark in them, hit them with a chisel, and then go out and probably be able to get them off just that easy, and then we'll press the new ones on. So to get you caught up, bring the camera over here. So I've already taken the rear cover off and drained the fluid. Really the only reason we needed to do that was I wanted to change the fluid out, and as I pull the axles, I want to flush any crud in the axle tube out, and it's going to come out this area. So we've got this little drain pan under here. We'll pull that gasket. Now would be a great time if you were going to be doing bearings or anything in there. It would be a great time to do it because you're going to have to spend the money on the oil, and this has got a limited slip, so don't forget to add a friction modifier. And you can find it at any auto parts store. You can order it online. Usually comes 4 to 8 ounces and cost, you know, $10, $12. So make sure you add that to your limited slip differentials. All right, so step one on today's job was to get that differential cover off. You need a 1/2 inch socket wrench. Take all the bolts out. I recommend you leave the top bolt in and then put your drain pan under it, and then you can pry the bottom of the cover off, and it lets the fluid run out without a big gush of it all at once. And then once most of the fluid's out, you can take that top bolt out and set the cover aside. Once that's done, we started draining the fluid, took the tire off, slid the drum off, and now we've got 4 bolts that go all the way through the axle flange, or through the housing flange, and they go, you line up this big hole here with each one of the bolts, and there's 4 of them in a square pattern. It takes a 3/4 inch socket, and you don't need a backup wrench or anything. The back, I'll show you this bolt. So the stud or whatever that's going through there, you can see it has a flat side on it, and that side is closest to the axle tube, so it won't rotate. So you have 4 of those. All right, now it's not imperative that you have an impact. You can do this with a just a regular socket wrench. And then now everything is actually loose. You're going to have to kind of pop it out of there, but there isn't anything actually physically holding it in place. So don't be afraid to pull on it a little bit, or you might even have to smack the backside of it with like a rubber mallet. Axle grease or fluid coming off of this, because it's not going to be particularly clean. The other one had enough, the axle tube appeared to have enough water in it at some point that the axle shaft actually had a little rust on it. Oh, so does this one. You can see it right here. So we'll clean all that stuff off as we go. Set the axle aside for just a minute, and then we can look at our drum brake. And now this whole drum brake will come off. So you could actually used to be able to buy a loaded drum brake, much like you can buy a loaded caliper today. You could buy a whole backing plate already loaded with your brakes. But what we've got, you can see these different parts now. So we've got the 2 retaining springs. These springs have a little cup on them, and you push in and turn it 90 degrees, and that'll come off. And there's a tool that's nice. If you don't have to have it, you can do it with a pair of pliers. There's a few tools that are pretty nice to have. One of them is something like this, and it's just got some teeth in there, so you can reach in there, push on that, and turn it, and it helps retain the spring and the little cup. They are 2 separate pieces, although typically once you push in on that pretty good, that cup kind of seats itself in the spring. Next things up are we have this tension spring here, and this is for the emergency brake adjuster, and it keeps the bottom of the shoes pulled together. This is the actual emergency brake adjuster down here. Because of this piece and how it functions, if you use your parking brake regularly, it auto adjusts your brake drum shoes, so your brakes are always adjusted. You're not having to actually manually come out here and adjust them. Then we have 2 more springs up here on top, and they pull the top of the shoes in so that the brake master or wheel cylinder can reach them and push out. And then we have this dividing bar here that is triggered by the arm for the parking brake. And when we pull this shoe, I'll show you that. And really, that's kind of it. There's a little spring down here on this end. We're basically putting all new parts in here. The only thing we're going to be reusing is the divider bar, the little spring that goes on it, because I couldn't find either of those pieces. And we've got to reuse the lever arm for the parking brake. So all of that's available, and I'll give you part numbers and even some links if I've got them to where you can buy them. But for now, we're going to set the drum brake aside, and we'll come back and actually do the brakes in a little bit. And what we got is, when we look at our axle, there's a seal closest to the outside that sits in this area here, then a tapered bearing, and then a it's a spacer or a stop for the axle, so it kind of sits tight into the housing. And then there's another seal deep inside the axle here, so we want to replace that seal before we go too far. And here's the problem: everything leaks, so we were getting grease and oil out into the brakes and ruined the brakes. But look at all the grease, and all of that comes from inside the differential and works its way out, and then it mixes with dirt and other crap that gets caught up in here. So we've got to clean all this out, because it really should not have all that nastiness in there. You would have some grease in the bearing, but you shouldn't have it running out like that. So what's happened is this inner seal has is not doing its job anymore, and so it's letting oil and grease mix. And then the outer seal, the other one that we have to press off with the bearing, it's leaking, and that's why we get the damage to our brakes and the leak out there. So we'll get all this cleaned up. We'll pull this seal. Now I'm going to use a slide hammer to pull it. You can try and get it with something like this that will reach in there, grab the seal, and you can try and pull on it until you get it out of there. It's a lot of work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There's also a race right here that on the other axle, it popped right out. Yeah, this one's going to as well. So we just need to get it. You would remove that race if you're going to put a new bearing in there, because you want the bearing and the race to be a matched pair. A lot of axles do not have this inner seal, and that's because they do use the oil from the differential to keep the wheel bearing oiled just from slosh. So Dana 44 does have one, so if you're doing this and you're going to do all of it, you may as well get this seal. They're about $6. So let me get a slide hammer and we'll pull this one out. And it's got basically what looks like a gear puller, and then there's this cone in the center. You can see that. So as you spin that tighter, it basically pushes out on the arms to tighten up. So that's how you keep them in place. So we're going to put that inside the seal. Then we just spin this down the... You can spin that piece or you can spin the T-handle, it doesn't matter. The goal is just to get it to where that cone is starting to push those arms out. And once you start getting close, then you'll get it pretty snug pretty quick. And then it's just a few hits. And there it is, that's our seal. So we're going to be replacing that seal with a new one, and we're getting all kinds of gunk come out of there again. That's just all the stuff. And you expect some of that fluid to make it up to this point, but it's full of gunk, so we just want to clean all this out as far as you can reach in there. And then we're going to spray a bunch of brake cleaner, and we're going to see that brake cleaner bring some gunk out and run out through the differential opening. Do yourself a favor, spray a light or shine a light down in there. Make sure you got it as clean as you can get it. It's like your one and only time you're going to ever probably clean this. You can see that stuff running out of there is dirty. Or hopefully you can see it. See in that bucket how much crap there is. So back over here. Once you're happy with level of cleanliness. Okay, so when you pull that seal out, a lot of times, especially the older ones, will have the original part number on here, and that's what I found was part number. It's a national part number 34419, and that number does not exist in National's database anymore. But under Spicer, which probably was, I don't know if they were the same company or what, but anyway, that number does exist. It was the seal for this axle, and that number crosses over to a couple different, but if you go to a Timken, it crosses over to a 473228. So there we go. So it crosses over to that 473228. And when you look at them, they look identical. I found it as a different national part number, and I'll try and remember and put that in the list for us. But you can see their outside diameter is the same, their inside diameter is the same. And so that's the replacement seal in today's numbers. So we're gonna, like always, I like to put a little bit of silicone around the outside, then we're gonna push that in there and drive it in. All right, so that's it. We don't need very much, just a nice thin coat. Put that all the way in as far as you can. And you were wondering why that rubber mallet was sitting up there, because I'm gonna need it. So what I've got is a 1 3/4 socket that fits really well with the steel. And it goes back in there quite a little ways. And you'll hear it when it bottoms out. Right there. Make sure it looks even all the way around. That's good. So this is the seal that we're going to be replacing. This bearing is the tapered bearing, and then this is the spacer or stop. I don't really know what they're called, but we're going to be replacing that too because it comes in our kit. So I bought this Yukon. It's AK set 10, and to get this one off, like I said, I fought the last one, and it's really because of this piece. It was just seized on there. So I cut it as far as I dared where I wouldn't get into the axle, and I just cut it with a cutoff wheel and abrasive wheel. And then once I got as close as I dared, I got a chisel and put it in the groove and smacked it 2 or 3 times, and you could hear it cracked and it sprung, and then everything would come right off after that. So that's going to be the method I use again this time to try and make this easier. I think this kit was, I want to say $50-ish. I don't remember now, but it doesn't come with that inner seal, and so you do have to remember to get that one separate. So let's get it the rest of the way off. This plate I'm using just flexes way too much for this job. Alright, so we can take those pieces off in order, and then we'll be replacing them with the new pieces. Now we're ready to start putting everything back on the axle. We've got to put the axle retainer flange on. I'm going to put that on, and then the bearing seal, and the seal goes this direction. So we'll get those on and get everything onto the axle, and then we'll press all that into place. Okay, all the parts are in place. So we're going to be using the press again. Now we're pressing down. There's a hole just a little larger than the retainer thing in there, and so we're going to press down on it. The seal needs to come all the way up here out of the way. I'll put it up there, and then the bearing needs to come up close to that line. You can see where the old one was, and then the retainer will be right there with it. So let's see what it looks like. It is. Release the pressure. This side's done. In the meantime, I also knocked out the wheel studs, and I just did that with a hammer just when it was sitting down here on the flange. Sitting on these, I had a little room, so I just pounded them out real quick, and we'll put some new wheel studs in once we install the axle. Okay, so I'm back with the axle, and we're going to go ahead and get it bolted in, get the backing plate back on. Let me grab a couple bolts that I can hold that temporarily in place, and then we can try and get all these parts on there. Went over my bolt bin there and grabbed a couple 7/16 inch bolts. Which I think the ones that are actually normally here are 1/2 inch, but should be enough to hold it in place so we can see if this will work. I'm just going to tell you up front, I've never tried doing the brakes on I guess this way, without the axle in there. In some ways it seems like it should be easier. I'm sure we will find, I mean, like normally this spreader bar kind of gets held in place by the axle flange, so I'm sure we'll find a couple reasons why you go, oh, okay, it worked, but maybe it's easier a different way. First thing we're going to do is just basically take everything apart, and I always take pictures. You never want to do both sides at the same time. Make sure you leave at least one side assembled while you're doing it so you can go back and forth and look. Just get pictures of anything in there, because you never know, when you get started and then you get distracted and now you go back and you're like, where did that piece go? So, got our pictures. We have the other side that we can reference off of if we need to. And really all we got to do is just start kind of taking stuff apart. A tool like this, basically you pretty much use this end, which is a pry bar, for putting the springs on. You can use the hook over here to try and grab some of the springs and pull them off. Whatever works for you. Most of the time I find that a couple pairs of pliers will do everything I need to do. So let's just start with that. These springs are under quite a bit of tension, so don't be surprised if you have to pull pretty hard. And I'm going to lay all the parts in one place here on the floor, and then I can bring the other parts out of their kits and compare them. So I make sure I get everything I need. So normally you reuse a lot of these parts, stuff like the adjuster, threaded adjuster, you reuse some of the springs a lot of times. This time we're not going to reuse any of that. We've got 2 brake shoes, and I need to show you here the difference in the brake shoe. So the one pad has much shorter shoe, the material, the stopping material is the other, and that shoe is your front shoe, it's your leading shoe, so that as the wheel turns, it's carrying the dust up here, and that dust can fall, and then it does the same at the bottom. This shoe is a little shorter on both ends versus this side. The metal is identical, it's just the material that is shorter on the front side. We're going to pull this off. Now, these 2 pieces we have to reuse, so we don't want to lose our spring or this divider bar or spreader bar. We're going to have to reuse this piece as well. And it just, piece of metal, it's basically rusted on there, so we'll clean all that up. This is our other shoe. See that piece right there is the plunger that goes in the wheel cylinder, and it is essentially frozen onto, rusted onto our brake shoe. We've got new pins. Now, these little retaining pins for the springs, normally I get new ones. I managed to forget to order any. So, got one that's a little bent. Actually, both are a little bent. We'll straighten them out. We'll clean them up on the wire wheel. We can reuse those. And then on this, we're going to pull in on this cable. There's not a lot of slack. And you wouldn't, normally you don't need to take this off if your brakes are in good shape. These have been in such poor shape for so long that I just want to clean all the extra parts up if I can. Maybe we won't get that off after all. Alright, in the meantime, this shoe goes over here. There is a C-clip right there, and there's a little washer under it, and we need to remove those. A lot of times you have to reuse them, so don't lose them. In my case, I did buy new ones. So we're just going to spread that C-clip apart if you can. As much as you can anyway. And then just a pair of pliers will usually, it's fairly soft material. A pair of pliers will usually get it the rest of the way. Now I did it, I closed it up more. So once you fight that washer and that C-clip off of there, then that just pulls out. And it's going to lay like that. So that shoe is done. That's the back shoe is the one with the material. The next thing is we're going to go ahead and pull this wheel cylinder. And for that, I like a 7/16, or excuse me, half-inch socket. And if you guys go back, I'll put a link in there, but you can go back if you want to know how to rebuild one of these wheel cylinders. A lot of times it is cheaper, especially if you have an oddball vehicle. A lot of times it'll be cheaper to rebuild one than it is to buy a new one. This one you can see all the gunk in there? Yeah, see all that trash in there? I'm sure the other side's the same way. Yeah, it's even worse. See all that crud in there, it's coming out? It's just a mess. So, rebuilding these would be more work than it's worth, in my opinion. But it can be done. We're going to throw those aside because we bought new ones. So now what we're left with is this brake arm. This is the arm I was telling you about that as it pivots up here, so as you pull in on this brake, it pushes out like that, pushing out your pad here and pushing across to the other side to the pad with this arm. So it's a pretty simple product. Anyway, I'm going to go get stuff a rag in here, then I'm going to get a wire wheel, clean all this up, a wire brush, something, clean all this up, probably spray it black, and then we'll start reassembling our new brakes. And for that, we've got a few parts. So for the new one, we've got a new wheel cylinder, and that is part number WC36076. It's a Ray Vestas part. It was actually only like $10 or something to buy a new wheel cylinder. We have a new hardware kit that has the cable, the rubber plug that goes right here for where the adjustment is. We'll knock this old one out. We got a new rubber plug. We've got the new adjuster arm. We've got the auto adjuster, which is that lever that was down here. And we've got the cable pulley that goes on this side this side, and the cable pulls against. And a little bit of grease. So we'll be using that. And that's a Dorman part number HW2544. So again, there'll be links in the description. Now I also bought this, and I bought it before I found that hardware kit. So I actually have yet another adjuster. And it's too late for me to return them, so we'll just have a spare adjuster. But they are left and right specific. And if that part was all you needed, H1520. A couple things you're going to need if you're doing mine like I am You can go out and try and clean these up. This is the plunger that comes off the wheel cylinder. Or you can buy new pins, which is what I did. They are a different shape. They go into the wheel cylinder the same, and if you notice the same diameter down here. So they go into the wheel cylinder identically. This one has a big long slot in it, whereas this has just a small slot. See that now? But they're the same length, so it doesn't really matter. It's just a different design. This design is more common than this design, so use that for what it is. But you can clean those others up. I'm going to use some new ones. Bought them, and they came in a bag of 8, I guess, so you could do your whole vehicle. It's a Rebestis H1421 with a part number. So we'll be using that. And then the last item you need for what we're doing now is the equivalent of this H7101. This is a hardware kit, and this is what's left over for parts from the other side, but it's the springs. It comes with 2 different sizes of the long springs, and that's because it fits both the 1 3/4 shoes like we have, and it also fits the 2 or 2 1/4, whatever they are, shoes, which use a bigger spring. They're a heavier duty brake. They came on the 74 and later Scouts, so you'd use that spring on those. Everything else is just a common part that you're going to use. There were extras, plus between my hardware kits I ended up having extra parts on a few of them. So we have another one of these, and that's universal to each side as far as left or right. The other parts are left and right specific, so I'll show parts for both. And that's pretty much it. So we'll get this cleaned up, and then we'll bolt our wheel cylinder in place, and then start building the apparatus around it. So just got all this painted, and I like to use this type of paint, a rust reformer. And so I wire wheeled it and brushed it wherever I needed to, and then spray it with this. This one is, I guess, essentially a primer, but it protects everything really well, and any surface rust or anything that's still on there basically begins to convert it back to a protected paintable surface, I guess. I mean, that's what it says. Instant. Anyway, the whole reason for that is just to keep it cleaned up and, you know, looking nice for future. Give us a good surface to work from. For now, what I need to do is go clean this bar up. And since I've got new pins, I don't have to clean up the old ones, so I'm going to clean these 2 pieces up, and we'll come back. By then, hopefully this paint will be dry. Hey, just as a little side note, I hadn't noticed on the last one, this is a Bendix part number, and there's 303397. I'm sure that's, I mean, this is obviously the original part, so that part number may be old, but hopefully they have actually put in a new, what am I trying to say, a new part number to replace it or something. So if you needed that part, that's a part number for it. And this brake lever is a Bendix 302141-L for the left side, or it would be -R for the other side. So if you're needing some of these parts, you know, maybe that'll help you. What we want to do is get this brake lever mounted to our shoe, and then we want to put the pins through and get the little coil springs to lock those in place. And I say we want to do that first. First, we actually want to get the wheel cylinder installed. So let's do that. Now, this wheel cylinder uses a 5/16 by about a 1/2 inch bolt. I'm going to replace the bolts, so I'm going to go get 2 of those, and then this just slips in there. And you can kind of see how it has that Mickey Mouse shape. The bolt comes up there into the ear and has a star washer on the back side. So let me Alright, so we're going to be replacing a couple of Cadium plated. These happen to be grade 8, but I like the Cadium plated. So that's mostly what I'm after. But I don't expect to ever personally be taking that back off, so they're Loctited on. I don't have to worry about it. And because those are 5/16, we're using a 1/2-inch socket. And you don't have to really crank down these, just a good probably 15 to 20 pounds of torque would be plenty. Alright. We still have a little of the lube from the last one. So we want to make sure the seal on the boot doesn't get tore up. We're going to add some to the pin. And it just pushes in there, and it's fairly tight because you want a good seal. There we go. That should work for now. Alright, so that's the part is basically assembled. We're going to take our 2 shoes, our new ones. And remember, the leading edge side has the short shoe, so it would go there. This is the one we want to play with first. It's got the longer pad length. And we're going to be adding back our emergency brake lever. And then we need to get a washer and that C-clip. So in this pivot arm rod that sticks out, there's a slot for this U-bolt or U-clamp to catch it. So you're going to be lining up through the big hole up here. This U goes to the top of the shoe. Then there's one hole that pin will fit through on that end. And then you need your little wavy washer and your U, and you got to basically force all that together. Again, a pair of pliers is going to help you, and if you had a third arm to hold everything in place, it'd be even easier. So see that? Something like that's more than enough. Now this goes on that pin up there, and you got little extra cables. You want to pull on that clutch and brake cable a little bit and get rid of some of the extra. There we go. Now we need one of our new pins that looks like a nail, and 2 of the coil spring cups. One goes on each side. We're going to install the nail through the hole in the backing plate, through the hole in the shoe, and then put that in place. In the next one, we'll put our spring, get our cup, get our installer tool. You gotta just hold pressure on that pin with one hand, and then line up. There it goes. Like I said, it's a 1/4 turn. Those nails seem way too long. They're about 1/4 inch longer. Let's see if they're all the same length. Okay, so it was nice that they included them, but they're too long. So it lets the shoe just flop all around. So I'm going to go clean these other two older ones up, and then we'll come back and reinstall that with the originals. Okay, so I went and cleaned those up, and like I said, they're just a little shorter than these others, which will keep this shoe from flopping around. So let me take this back off. And I think I mentioned earlier, once you've pushed one of those in there the first time, they tend to kind of stay, which makes it a little easier for the next time. So let's take that pin out, set it aside. We'll add the original pins. Back through the brake shoe. First cup on, and it goes the flat washer side towards the shoe, and your spring, and then this makes a little more, looks a little better as far as links. There we go. Turned too far. And don't worry too much about getting everything in the right place just yet, because you're going to kind of fight this thing a few times trying to get everything to line up initially. But if you can get it close, great. And that's what we got. We got it close. So now we can do the other shoe. Two cups in the spring again. First cup goes on flat side towards the shoe. Just like that, we have the second shoe basically installed. We have this bar. This comes up here and is essentially what locks the top of the shoes in. Okay, so we got our little triangle piece in place, got our cable, and we can adjust it in a little bit. Come back to that piece in a minute. And then we have the guide that the cable runs over. So the cable basically is allowed to slide on that for adjustment, or we want to get that behind there if possible. And this spring holds both of those in together. So we're coming up like this. We're going to use the end of our spring. And then I find that if you can smack on it, it doesn't really matter with what, just something to move the spring. Once it gets to here, the tension on the spring becomes a lot less effort, and then you just need to rock it in there. And then our little, the little piece back here kind of came off of its stud, so there you want to make sure it's pushed all the way up on there. And then we'll use a screwdriver here, try and make just a little bit of room so we can get the cable in there. If you can get the cable to stay in there to begin with, it's always the best method. But sometimes just, there it goes. And then kind of rock that piece back to where it'll lock that cable in, and you'll see there's a kind of a really tight spot right there where that cable's got to go behind. And then we'll come back to that in a minute. Then I like to take a pair of pliers and squeeze the spring closed a little bit so less chance of it coming apart. Get our other spring. And this one doesn't have to lock into anything, it just goes in the hole. And go up here and pry on the stud again. Same trick, just knock that down. Over it, there you go. Close the spring up. Now we got our top ones on, and our shoes are where they're supposed to sit. And our little pins are in place. If they weren't, now would be a great time to finish up getting the top parts right. The next few pieces we have are, this is the self-adjuster, so every time you set the parking brake, it's going to move based by this cable, and that adjusts your brake adjuster. You're going to have a washer, the tooth and it's threaded. One side is left, one side is right hand thread, so left hand goes, it's going to be weird, left hand thread goes to the right side, right hand thread comes to the left side, and that's so that they don't unwind easily. Now before you put this together, because you're metal on metal here, put yourself some anti-seize in there on those threads, because we do want it to adjust smoothly. We just don't, but we don't want it galling up or rusting in there, because you know your brakes do get wet. So turn that thing all the way into the smallest point. You don't want to crank down on it. Once you get there, it bottoms out or whatever, just stop. That's enough. Maybe a couple threads out. Put the washer on, and then you put the cap. And that washer is just so that it has something else to pivot on. And then the two slots go down here in the bottom of the shoes. This shoe needs to come over a little bit. Oops, I got it backwards. The teeth have to go, there's a hole in the backing plate here. The teeth have to go to that side. Also, you want it closest to this gear side. So I'm going to take a little bit out. This shoe still needs to come in. This one needs to go that way a little bit. Before we go any further, we got to get this bar in place, and the spring will only fit on one side. Only one side's narrow enough to accept it. We're gonna cheat. We're gonna take this off real quick, just so I can get the shoe to move a little further than it normally would. There we go. Way easier than beating on it, right? Okay, so that shoe's actually now pretty close to being in place. There we go. And our adjuster fell out, so put that back together. Got it a little tighter now. So you can see there's two little slots there. Just get enough adjustments so that it won't fall out, but it'll let you pull everything together. We'll adjust it correctly in a little bit. Now the hook goes through this big hole at the bottom of the shoe, and what's going to happen is every time you set the parking brake, it's going to spin that wheel. The hole in the back is so we can adjust the brake from that side. Hope all this is making sense. All right, then we have blue spring, and this spring is what gathers the bottom of the shoes together to hold all this snug. So it hooks in this big hole, and then this hook goes in that on the auto adjuster. And this one's kind of a pain. Not a lot of tools you can use to do anything because this auto adjuster wants to move around. So what I found is the best thing to do is to grab it with a pair of pliers. Grab this with a pair of pliers on the end and pull over there until you can get it into that adjuster. So I'm going to get on this side. Now something I did on the other side was I took this spring off again. So I guess I could have left it off when we were messing with this just a minute ago. So we've got one cap on backwards. We've got everything lined up. We're going to try pulling this over with that little bit of extra space. Got it. That was all we needed, just that little bit of room. Made it to where we could get this together. Make sure all your parts are in the right place. Put the spring back on. There we go. And that shoe's up on the guide. There we go. Alright, so now it's time to put this axle in. And I don't ever put anything together dry, if you will. So you can put oil in there, you can put grease, whatever, but put something on that seal so we don't damage it as we put this thing together. Our bearing's going to sit in here, so just make sure that whole surface is clean. And I'm wiping down the axle one more time. So when we slide it in, these teeth have to go into the differential, so you may have to twist it, and you're trying to find this 1-inch hole 2.5 feet from you. So many rude comments I could come up with. I'm not going to use any of them. Be careful about how you do it, and don't tear up the new seal that we put in there, that new inner seal, as you go. Now see, it's sitting like this, and we got to pick that end up to get it to go into the differential. There it goes. We didn't take those bolts out. I don't like to put seals in dry, so we're going to put a little bit of silicone on the outside of this outside, what's called the outside or outboard seal. It doesn't need very much, just enough to seal against any oil or grease seeping by it. Just a nice thin even coat around the whole thing. That's it. That's all that gets. And then line it up with the axle shaft with the differential. That flat part of this plate goes up. It'll take a little bit of force, but not too much. I put a little bit of Loctite on these bolts already, so we can and they are a locking nut. So as we go together with this, it'll hold up really well. Just get one or two started. Two preferably, maybe all of them. But just get a few started, and that'll keep everything from coming apart on you. And there you go, you just slide it the rest of the way in. It makes a nice solid thunk when it gets to the bottom. And then you can put the rest of the nuts and bolts on. That's tight. Now we want to torque it. And the torque for this is 80 to 90 foot-pounds. So I'm set on 85. And we're done with that side of it. We need some new lug nuts. Or lugs. Nuts, I guess. And I bought a whole bunch. And mostly I bought a whole bunch because I messed up and ordered them twice. So the tool we're using for this, you can take this out and put it in the press, and you can press those studs in. It's kind of a pain because you're working from the backside, but it's doable. I could also put it in an arbor press that I have over on the other bench, and you could press them in. Works just fine. What I really like though is this tool, and it's basically just two hardened surfaces with a bearing between them, and it's called a car wheel stud installer. This is one I got off of Amazon, so I'll put a link to it in there. And all you can do is get your new stud. And these are a little over a ½ inch longer than the old ones. Fish that thing in there somewhere. Put that on there. Use anti-seize. You're doing metal on metal here. And it will gall and mess your whole day up. This is a 13/16 socket. And I recommend you just use old lug nuts. Something that the threads aren't tore up in, but and then you just crank down on it. You can do it by hand, you can do it with an impact until you see the back flange of the lug. See what I'm talking about? So you see this back flange, till you see this back flange pull in tight to the flange of the axle. So we're going to do this 5 times. I think my battery's dying. The lug nuts get really hot, so I recommend you don't touch them. And you just got to find a void where you can get in from behind the axle. But did the other side yesterday, so I knew I could get in there without having to do this before when we're trying to hold the axle and get everything lined up. So make sure you use anti-seize, plenty of it. You're putting a lot of heat in there. Last thing you want to do is weld these things together. And again, I'll give you, here's one of the part numbers I bought. Here's one of the part numbers I bought, and they're an extended stud. One company sent them to me 5 in a box. The other company just sent them loose. There you can see they're same thing. I just, I'd forgotten I ordered them and ordered a whole nother set. No big deal, just something else to make use of. The other thing is I recommend you don't use the same lug nut multiple times in a row because they get so hot. So again, they're a pain to mess with, but also they will start burning you. Or I mean, they will start wanting to lock up on you. Get one like that, get rid of it when you're done, because that one will mess you up later on by virtue of being of already having some damage or something going on in it. And what I was trying to say is that it didn't just want to come right back off. It was the threads were galling a little bit, trying to put it off. Dropped it. That's it. Put that bearing in our box with our other studs so we can do the front ones later. And we've got this side almost buttoned up. Okay, so just a little bit of brake cleaner. We're just trying to get any gray spots that we put on the shoes from our hands. Not trying to take all the paint and everything else off the rest of the thing. Looks like We got it pretty good. Now we'll get our new drum out. And clean the inside of it. Alright, now once you clean that, don't touch the inside again with your hands, especially if there's any grease on them. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to clean the outside because we're going to be painting it. Alright, let's put this on. Now you'll notice it slides on really easy. It's on there. I can do it. Go a couple clicks. Check it. They are starting to feel tight right up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and put the drum on by the way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run some lug nuts on here. And all we're doing is to protect the threads, because when we go to paint this, we're going to want them nice and clean. Serving two purposes for us right now. They're going to hold this drum on, and then it turns really nice still. We want just a little bit of drag. We're starting to get some, so we're going to go slower. Maybe just a little more. You got good drag on there now, so it takes some effort to turn it, and that's what we want, so that those brakes are adjusted. And then after you drive it the very first time and get the brakes a little warm and bed them in, then go back and maybe adjust them one more time. You'll have the tire, you just jack it up, get underneath it, and spin the tire a little bit, and just to where they're just dragging. And then that's where you're going to leave it, and then using your parking brake, I know I've said it 20 times, using your parking brake after that will make it to where they self-adjust. Again, this is that rust reformer, and we'll paint it gloss black so it'll match everything else once this has a few minutes to sit. And then the next thing we're going to do is get into that rear axle, clean it all out with some brake cleaner, put a new gasket and the cover on it. We're done. Well, we got to build a brake line, so we're almost done. Again, just a really thin coat. We're not trying to make a complete gasket out of silicone. All right. Now, if you were to get a torque wrench out, you'd probably be in the 10 to 12 foot-pounds. If you hold this wrench pretty close tight and don't rip down on it, you're going to be really close to that kind of number anyway. Once you've gone around them once, go back around them all again one more time. And like I said, try and do some kind of cross pattern. If you start to see the gasket bulge out at all, you're too tight. You need to stop. And that's pretty much it for that. So we need to make a brake line to go across here, and we'll be installing our, we got a lift kit, we needed an extended brake line. So Skyjacker makes lines that were already plenty long enough, so that's and they come with the Y block that bolts onto your axle, which is supposed to bolt on over here, and then your line goes up. So that's basically what we're going to duplicate. We're going to make a short line to come off the far brake drum over to this bolt, which will be this block, and then a longer one that comes across, up and over, and to it. And we have the original ones to copy, but I'll show them to you. They are very, very poor condition. That's probably the best I can say for them. Here are the two lines we have to start with. I guess this one probably went this way. And this. I don't know who made them. I don't know why they are so badly bent and shaped, because I think this one was just too long and nobody wanted to shorten it. This one may have been the same things. They may have been replaced at some point. I don't know. But they're not much help other than to give us the right nut sizes. And we'll make some new ones to do the distance that we're wanting to cover. So we're going to build the long one first. We'll put one end on so that we can go ahead and tie into the wheel cylinder, and then we'll come out with a couple tight bends straight down over the two U-bolts, then through the clamp up over the housing and to our block. And once we know pretty much the right distance, then we'll cut the line to exact length and put our final fitting on there. Then this side should be fairly easy. We'll just make a short one up to the wheel cylinder, and up, we'll keep it nice and tight to the axle. All right, so our first measurement went from there roughly up over the axle and back down the axle, and about 3 feet right there, 3 feet right in there, and then we got to get up to there. So it's about probably 42 inches thereabouts. So we'll cut a piece 48 inches long. That gives us plenty of extra material. And I'd rather cut away and throw away, 4 to 6 inches than have to start all over because I came up half an inch short. We're going to go ahead and run 3/16 inch line, and then when we come out of our main line up here on the frame, we'll run 1/4 inch line all the way to the master cylinder. So that'll get our volume of fluid to this line, and then that'll bring it down to an amount that splits into the 3/16. And hopefully you can see I already got the line made from the far side all the way over and into our block, and I'm making the second line now. So what I like to do is, I think I mentioned earlier, is measure roughly what you need for a line, and then make sure you add a little extra. In this case, you can kind of see on the other side there, the wheel cylinder line comes out at an angle, so I put my first angle in, and then I screw that fitting in there and kind of see where the top of the line is going to be, and that's what that black mark was right there. And then put that in the bender, and now I've kind of got two parallel lines with some compound angles in there. Then the next thing you do is run your line up into, reinstall it again. So you're going to end up installing these lines a couple times. Install that line again, and what you want is a mark where your block is, right on the end of it. And then, if you haven't already done it with whatever tool you're using to make your flares, you want to measure, you want to measure how much tube it takes to make the flare. In my case, it's about 1/8 of an inch. And then you want to stick that finished piece in there and put a mark and measure. And there's about 5/16 of an inch from the end of the block to the top of the flare. So 5/16, and the 1/8 inch for the flare is 7/16. So anytime I make a line, I put a mark where the end of my block is, and at least with this block, I need to add 7/16 of an inch to that mark for a finished line to fit correctly. So in this case, it's 3/16 line. I'm using this hydraulic press. You can do it with just the manual version. I just don't like to work that hard. And then we add the die that fits inside the line and flares it out. The hydraulics. Squeeze that in until that die stops moving. That's it. Release it. And the next die is a cone, and that's what puts that double flare on there. Basically turns the edges back in on themselves. Double flare. We'll start. Another thing I forgot to mention is I like to put a little anti-seize on these fittings. can see here where I added just a little bit of a slope, you know, up and over the U-bolts. That's just to keep it from rubbing on there. We can tighten up the ones on the wheel cylinders. And we are essentially done with reconditioning our rear axle. Now, we didn't do new gears, we did not do a new differential, but we've got new brakes, new brake lines, new bearings everywhere but around the carrier, so out at the ends. We've got a new seal, or a new gasket on the differential cover. So hopefully, we got a new flex line. But hopefully, when we go to fill this whole thing up and start driving it, we have good quality brakes and fresh oil and all that in our system. So guys, I hope you found that useful and interesting. Get something out of it. It's not hard to do any one of these jobs. You know, there are a few specialized tools that you kind of want to have. The tubing bender, or not the tubing bender, but the tubing flare tool. I was using a little hand bender the whole time. Again, I'll put a link, a lot of this stuff in the description. I'll try and give you some part numbers, so if you're looking to do much of the same work, you have all that information. And the rear's done. We've got to run some brake lines and some fuel lines to the front of the truck. But that'll be a different project, a different day. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And we'll see you again on another House of Custom Project Car TV. Please like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Have a great day.